I was interested, first of all, in the title of this sort of transition to a new paradigm in economy, and the first thing I thought was that's a rather confusing phrase, because as we all know, a new paradigm is something that happens after a lot of small incremental changes, which reach a tipping point, and then you flip into a new and sometimes unexpected paradigm. But maybe when you think about it a bit deeper, because of where we are globally with world issues and economic issues, maybe planning a transition to a new paradigm is actually not a bad thing, for all the reasons we've been hearing today. I was looking in the coffee break. I decided I wanted to go and find a quote that I felt was very, very relevant. And it's a quote from last year from George Osborne, the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer, and probably a more powerful man in the country than the actual Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister takes all his direction and lead normally from the Chancellor. And I can't remember precisely what he was asked by the Green Party, the environmentalists, but he stood up very angrily with his pad at the podium, and he said this: "We're not going to save the planet by putting our country out of business." I'll say that again. We're not going to save the planet by putting our country out of business, which is quite an unbelievable phrase to make, because obviously there will be no country to save if there's not a planet. And I thought that was rather naive. But it's an example of how very, very senior politicians showing that they're not really able to change some deeply embedded structural ways of doing things, which will bring in the new paradigm we're looking for. So am I optimistic or pessimistic about the new economy? Well, I have mixed feelings, and I'll tell you a couple of things that make me pessimistic, and then I'll tell you a couple of things that make me optimistic. I was very pleased when I saw that the Sustainable Development Goals had been approved and signed, and I just thought it was a wonderful step forward. And there's a chap called Lord Andrew Stone, who is one of the Lords in the House of Lords in Westminster, and he asked permission from the government to try and resurrect the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, which had kind of stagnated. And Lord Andrew Stone asked me to join his parliamentary committee to work on the peace process, which I do every few months. And I was quite honoured to be asked to help, because right from when I was a child, I remember hearing the news on the television of the constant fights and constant treaties between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which continue today. So I sat on that committee, and the first thing you do is you make sure you're comfortable with everyone you're working with. And I noticed there were 5 representatives from Israel, and there were 5 representatives from the Palestinians, and there was 5 from the UK. They were all men. And so when we were asked if we were happy, I said I do not conceive of any peace process working between Israel and Palestine unless you have a female representative of those two countries in the discussion group, which did not go down well with the people from Israel and Palestine, although the UK agreed with me. But what made me pessimistic was that the list of issues on the table for discussion to move forward, when they were read out, there was maybe 50 or 60 issues from both sides. And over the next 3 hours, there was zero, completely zero progress made. Now that committee is still going ahead. It's part of the SDG peace process, but I was disappointed at the lack of progress to date. Similarly, a friend of mine who's done a lot of calculations about the carbon emissions treaty and the fact of what we need to do to get to the right level of carbon emissions, he's made it very, very, very clear that unless every country cooperates on meeting those targets, it is a recipe for disaster, and it never will make any difference, because one country will not be brave enough to cut its carbon emissions unless it sees all the other countries doing the same thing. So these are causes pessimism. A few other things that I find quite depressing are massive corruption in the biopharmaceutical companies, massive corruption in the food industry, and in the agricultural and clean water. People trying to put patents on seeds and patents on clean water to maximise their profits at the expense of people who are living in poverty. So there's a lot of negativity, and I think we could talk about Brexit and the presidential elections in the US as well. But on the other side of the equation, there are a number of things that give me great hope, and I had to, one of them, Steve, in your presentation earlier, was very, very thought-provoking. And I made a note of one of the comments you said, which was that companies of the future need to be led by spiritually evolved, self-effacing servant leaders. And that was very, very profound. And to my mind, no other type of leader is kind of viable if we're going to transition and solve world problems. So I thought that was, and also the other comment you made, that companies have a purpose that transcends profit maximisation. So these are the kind of positive statements. We've also got a lot of organisations growing in strength and making a real difference. Companies like Greenpeace, like Navars, like Mind Labs, like even like Eternia that I'm involved with in the US. They're now getting thousands upon thousands of supporters who are signing petitions that are actually making a difference, and that gives me great hope. There are also lots of good organisations doing things, and they're starting to converge. The organisations are starting to come together, and by working together rather than isolation, they're becoming more powerful. So, in summary, I do believe we've got the capacity, the resilience, the adaptability as a species to solve most things, and that gives me personally a lot of hope. And I have to say that I'm very proud to be part of the movement that is trying to tackle these issues, because I cannot think of anything more important to do with one's life than try and make a little bit of a difference.